And Oliver and I worked quite strongly together on the design, talking about what do the pages look like? What do the type looks like? I mean, when you make a book and you're making it from a blank slate, which we were, literally where the page numbers go, where the titles go, what you put on each page has to do with the flow of the book. Gary and I spent a lot of time with books and looking at rhythm. And so when you see the book and you see a page with a picture and text, and then two pictures, then one picture, all those things were very much thought about as we went through.
Go ahead on the writing a little bit, Oliver, because that was real critical.
Yeah, so the writing was I always recommend that when you're in the field, you just basically write a few notes about how you feel taking the images. Is we tend to always write basically metadata, but I pretty much started from blank sheet of papers, and then really what Gear pushed me to do is nobody is interested on how you took those images there, but everybody is going to be interested is how you felt, and then is basically what it meant for you to photograph those people. And then the thing is, photographing those people was not a one-time event. It was basically multiple visits that I returned, and then it was kind of a back and forth, giving back to them the images that I take on previous trip, so that the next time I would be there is they would basically open up and then really show who they were. And then I think the writing was important to mention and then elaborate on is the importance of knowing the subject that you photograph and then really bonding with them so that you give them a voice. So suddenly they had a voice through basically my writing there.
We also really thought about the materials, the colors. How could we be sensitive to the cultures? How could we bring out how we felt about it? And just really looked at both the fabric, the possibilities for different inks, what would be the duotone colors that we would use, how would could we also integrate those into blending into the text? So the red with the end pages and the cultures, beige that is kind of detailing. So really trying to make the whole thing have a symbiotic relationship with the sense of the images. The toning that Oliver brings to his images is echoed in the toning that's in the pages also.
I remember we spent a week just discussing the cultural aspects of colors.
Mm-hmm.
And that was quite interesting, because we're dealing with different, cultures, but also countries and nationalities. And how was red perceived? How was yellow, green, rather than just arbitrarily choosing it as a design element?
And also to keep the whole book very, very clean, and yet knowing that people would want to know more, that these pictures had stories behind them. And so one of the greatest tortures that we put Oliver through
Yes.
was telling him that he had to not just write about each of the images, but write in a place that would fit on this page. And so we were literally like writing and then editing down and then fitting it and text fitting it, and really trying to get it so that for people who wanted that deeper cultural experience, they could have the story. But for people who simply wanted to be involved in the imagery, they were not interrupted in the flow of the book. That the book was about pictures, but we didn't.
That those layers of meaning, like Kate's saying, you could look at the book just as a visual experience without the storytelling, just enjoy looking and seeing, and that would succeed. And then if you were someone who really wanted to read about history, about the people, about where they came from, what the specifics were in each picture, that would also be there, and that would synergize to create the end product.
Right.
And eventually we actually ended up with a dummy, like the one that you see, and that dummy was presented at PhotoFest in 2018. So when the reviewers saw the dummy, they said, "Oh my God, this is an incredible book!" And then it was just printed pretty much on a photocopy machine at Longo. So that's already how good the quality was of the book. And then really after we made that dummy, is we went back to really the sequencing, and then Gear again taught me something that was really, really important about that sequence. And then that it had to be kind of a very tactile. We had to had a tactile basically experience with the book. So back to basically paper is just gluing pictures in, and then trying to figure out basically what would work or what wouldn't work, and then really the rhythm, how the life of the cycle of life would actually be represented from those people perspective there.
And we can really share that this is something we do for most of our books, is that we physically print them and make small little mock-ups, because the actual rhythm of turning the pages and the time between pages is different than seeing it just on the computer. And that's been a real hallmark to help us with sequencing and finding our rhythm.
The wonderful gift that working digitally gives us is also the plight of our time, because we make an assumption that we can go from that screen to something that is a visual, tactile, in your hands, personal experience that is so different than the screen.
And you can see the simplicity of the design, very classic, traditional photography with little information, non-intrusive information. But if people want to know about the location where those images were done, they had that small information, and they could refer to the caption that were put at the end of the book where the story were written there. So one of the idea is like what I did in the project, that was a back and forth. So that was not a single pass. The timeline pass was not on a single. So same idea for people that basically would experience the book. They would go basically that back and forth between the images, looking at the images in pretty large format, and then the caption that came at the end of the book.
I also want to mention how critical the brainstorming week on the grease board, when we were writing, what is this really about? We have all kinds of information about what the pictures are of. They are of 5 countries. They are of these different cultures. They embody so many different aspects of what we could create. We could create a book of journeys through 5 countries. But really, I wanted to know what they were about. And that session, that week, was so powerful, Oliver. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yes, and that really is what I put in one of the slides there. It was making this book was an open heart surgery, was really, really getting deep into what was my role as an artist, is what did I really want to say there. If you look at Robert Frank that did The American, was Swiss too, right? And then why did he have the right to tell the story about American as a Swiss person? So it was the same for me there, right? As a Swiss, what was basically the trigger that enabled me to tell the stories with authenticity of those people from from Asia? And then I think it was really going back to the roots of who you are as a person. And then that's was very difficult, right? Very difficult to put in words, is what the story was. Why was I basically looking at the progression and what had changed between family, work, and spirituality with those people over the 15 years that I had photographed them?
You know, and that's where this, I think the relationship we developed, Kate Oliver and I, over these years, we were so connected that we could, I think there was a moment where I just said, I just feel your heart and soul in these images, Oliver. You're in there. And really, I feel the heart and soul of these people and where they live. And it was that pivotal point where we started to realize that what they're about is the spirit, heart, and soul of humanity. And they transcend the individual places we're in. They transcend the people themselves, the languages, everything, to become a universal human condition almost. And my hope was that what we were feeling was a quality that could be looked at around the world as being representative of what we go through as human beings, as things change, as our lives change, as we get older, as the difficulties we go through, and so on. And that's where Spirit, Heart, and Soul came from.
Yeah.
And then finding writers who could really not just be who could write to that idea, write to their own connections and their own authentic connections to the same concepts
Yeah.
of spirit, heart, and soul.
And then that all came together. Once you do that, then you start resequencing. You might even readdress some of the images. I remember a time when Oliver and I were up in the big conference room at Photo Central, and we laid out new pictures. You remember, Oliver? Yeah. And there were a couple. I said, remember that one of X? And it comes back into the fray because it becomes that kind of glue that pulls together the storyline in a very effective manner.
Yeah. And then at that point there, when we had the writer that did line up, there was always that that concern is said, would they write and know what we were saying in that book? And it was really incredible because, I mean, Ann Wilkes Tacker really felt that project. She had seen that project over the years there. And she was like delighted to write it. But we also went a little bit further and then found writer from Europe too, because I wanted to have that Europe perspective in a book. So Peter Fink, who is a big academic at the University of Zurich and well connected to the Asian world, wrote some incredible, basically powerful sentences, something that even gave me a better insight of what I was seeing when I was photographing there.
But then that's also balanced by both Oliver's reflection and Gere's writing, but also by the small pieces in the midst of the project that were the guides and people that Oliver had traveled with, both through in each place. So really bringing inside the book, bringing it back to the people that were really there when the images were made.
Yeah, so we get a perspective, we get an academic perspective, we get an art perspective, we get an anthropological, sociological perspective, and then the personal ones. And all of that coalesces together to tell the whole story.
And eventually the book was ready to go to press there. So before we actually chose Longo, to me, there was a trip back to memory lane, because my dad was a pressman. So I remember the smell of the ink, the velocity of the paper, the noise of this Heidelberg press, which is what you see in that image there. And then we had basically many ways to go in terms of printing that book. So we met with the presses from the US, we met the presses from China, Canada, Korea, Switzerland, and Italy. But there's really two defining moments there that made us choose Longo as a press. So 10 years ago, Gere had published a book with Oceanic Graphic Printing, now called 1010 Printing. And then we met with the owner, David Lai, in San Francisco. And remember, 10 years later, David Lai still remember vividly the book that he had printed about basically True North. So it was one of the favorite book that he had printed. We told him a little bit what we were after in that book, which was a much larger format. The paper was really important to us, the feel that we wanted to give about the deboss and so on. And then really David Lai told us, I said, do you know what is, as much as I want to basically print your book there, I don't know if I can give you the feel that you basically want on that book there. So
and he said, I can get close. I can get really close, he said.
Yeah.
But then Oliver and I went to the Art Museum Book Association meeting that was in San Francisco and got to meet with Longo, showed them what we wanted. Mark Sittert, who is on this call, had printed his book at Longo. We got to see him there also. And that sense that they really embraced the project, that they wanted to print this, and that they felt like they had the the knowledge, the depth, and the dedication to do it was really what made us go with Longo.
Yeah, I think meeting with the owner Harold there, and he saw my print. I had basically a box of print with me, and he just told me, he said, "You know what? Is looking at the print. He just had came back from that National Museum Association where he saw some incredible basically project. He said, this is a project that I want to do." And then at that point was a matter of basically choosing the right paper. Is we wanted to have some really rich print there, and is how could we push basically the boundary even further. So that's what it basically boiled down to. So just give you a sense there, every time we basically printed, as you can see on the image there, you have a scanner. So every image was scanned and then basically looked at in comparison to the print that I made myself. And then really the pressmen, they were incredible in terms of replicating the feel and the tonality, because my tonality in my images come from the ink, because I mix my own ink too when I print. So there was that challenge there, is that the digital file was not the digital file that basically the image represented. So there was a lot of colors that we picked. We eventually, we ended up printing with basically on a 7-color press there, which was pretty amazing on a very, very thick paper there. So everything was working incredibly well. And then, but we were looking at all the reject. I think what is called, Kate told me that it's called the make ready, those garbage prints there. And just looking at those garbage prints there, we said, oh my God, can we take all that stuff back, a suitcase back to the US? That's how incredible the printing was at Longo.